Hello, my name's Gavin, this is Genre Books, and this is Volume 1, Issue number 11 of Planet Stories. I am returning to the first project I ever had on BookTube, as I've been neglecting it for a few months. But here we are with Issue 11 from the summer of 1942, and still only 20 cents. The first story today is Ross Racklin, Task to Larry. This is a returning scenario for this writer. We are looking at the Bureau of Transmitted Egos and our hero Sid Hallmeyer. He is an interplanetary fixer employed by an agency to solve problems of great import. Having to travel to other planets can be inconvenient if you have a human physiology, which is where the Bureau of Transmitted Egos comes in. Every planet has one. You turn up and get your consciousness transplanted into a body of a native of that planet, only for a duration, and no damaged goods may be returned, or there is usually a heavy price to pay. We have here a hollow planet, a dying race, space pirates, who are stealing all the vitamins that Mercury produces. So it's a bit of a strange setup. There is a little flash of humour here and there in this story, but it is actually quite sombre because we are talking about a race that is dying. Okay, it's a fictional race that we've never heard of before, but it doesn't mean you have to treat it completely lightly. And this doesn't. We are used to stories of humans and aliens battling it out, but this gives the complication of a traitor, a fifth columnist, a quisling within that alien race who is quite happy to bring the curtain down on their species for not very much gain for themselves. It's a fairly sombre and morally very dark grey start to the magazine, but the humour picks up with the next story by John Broome, which is The Cosmic Derelict. There is probably a whole anthology of stories from science fiction pulps which could be made of tales which could just as easily be nautical tales by switching out a few pieces of equipment. The structure of the crew is all very naval. The level of intelligence of some of these star sailors is entirely questionable. Solutions are quite simplistic, and items from nautical tales are easily transplanted into a spacefaring equivalent. Amongst all of these nautical tales, I must have read at least a half dozen by now, based on the idea of a Sargasso in space. I mean, some are simply called Sargasso in space, but these usually happen areas where ships are held, either becalmed or via tractor beam or some such thing, some trick of gravity from an either natural or nefarious source. And this is one of those tales, but it heaps on a shovelful of superstition, which the captain of the ship scoffs at and later has to retract his views or reevaluate his idea of the galaxy. There are flashes of humour, which is an old-fashioned kind of humour. Not the old-fashioned in that you have to make excuses for it. It's just a little bit cheesy But you do have to wonder, in such a high technology future as this posits, why the entrance exams to become a crew on one of these ships is so easy. But it's a lot of fun. The next story is by Dirk Wiley, and I want to talk about Dirk Wiley just a little bit today. Sounds a very dynamic name. So, as you can imagine, it's a pseudonym. He also wrote under the name Dennis Lavonde and Elliot Whitney, but real name Joseph Harold Dockweiler, known to his friends as Harry. He was a student alongside the much more celebrated science fiction writer Frederick Pohl, and collaborated on a few stories with Pohl. Pohl would collaborate with pretty much anybody, but Dirk Wiley also wrote alongside C.M. Kornbluth, Richard A. Lowndes and Arnold Kummer Jr. He was a member of the Futurians, that science fiction grouping, and when those Futurians split into their various factions, he joined Donald A. Wollheim and John B. Michel to form the East New York Science Fiction League. He was also a member of the Committee for the Political Advancement of Science Fiction, a quite left-wing group of the Futurians. As you can imagine, lots of these groupings with names and committees and etc. did not survive the Second World War. Dirk Wiley only barely survived the Second World War. He joined up. This issue comes out in the summer of 1942. So when this story was written, I should imagine is very, very early 1942, which means that Pearl Harbor is just a month old. So he may already have signed up by the time this story was published. Nonetheless, he saw action in Europe. He saw action in the Battle of the Bulge, and whilst he came through that unscathed, there was an accident afterwards which injured him, and he was invalided out of the army. In civilian life and in poor health, he started a literary agency alongside Fred Pohl, the Dirk Wiley Literary Agency. But it was only going a year before he succumbed to tuberculosis of the spine and died. But his widow, a fellow Futurian, Ros Cohen, and Pohl continued the agency after his death. Given when he started, given the interruption of the war, given the fact he didn't live long after the war, means that there are barely a dozen science fiction stories with his name. Half of those are written with someone else. But not this one. This is one of the 6 that has only his name, Asteroid of the Damned. This is pretty much a crime pulp in space. So we've seen a nautical pulp transplanted to space. This is hard-boiled crime on some far-flung asteroid. Our hero is a member of the Triplanetary Investigation Unit Bureau. It really doesn't matter. And he's looking into drug pushing on a remote asteroid. There are interesting aliens, inhabitants of this asteroid, which they don't breathe oxygen. They get contact highs off of base metals. They can't talk except via scrawling something on notepads, which is barely legible. The asteroid has no commercial value to the rest of the solar system, so it has become a sort of Freeport gambling den, out of the scope of most authorities, and an ideal place to be conducting your illicit businesses. It's a good story, although it finishes a little quickly, but it has a really sort of nice atmosphere for an asteroid that has no atmosphere. There is something injected by the writing. I wish there was more of Dirk Wiley's stories, but I suppose we have to be grateful for the dozen that we have with his name attached. We have many more stories by the next writer. It's the return, again, of Ray Cummings, the Star Master. For such a veteran, even by this point, of the genre, Ray Cummings takes an awful lot of stick in the letter section of the magazine. People just do not think he brings anything new to the genre. He obviously had done, but possibly by this point in his career, some of these critics may have a point, although he does continue to do it very well. This story is set on Venus, although we start off on Earth. A guy and his best friend are out hunting and find a Venusian woman who is escaping from some people. They are all kidnapped and returned to the planet Venus, where the story begins in earnest. Now, I know I've reviewed a story in one of these previous Planet stories where we have a guy and his best friend out fishing, and they find a girl from another planet who is escaping from some people and end up being kidnapped and taken back to their planet. So when people accuse Ray Cummings of being a little formulaic, that is not an accusation without merit. But it's always good fun. Yes, at this point, his best days possibly were behind him. The well of inspiration has run dry, but, he was still a draw for a magazine. If you had a Ray Cummings story in, you'd have a bunch of people who would read it in order to be angry that there was a Ray Cummings story in there, but there would be other people who had been reading Ray Cummings for 2-3 decades and would give a chance on all of these new writers because we had an established figure like Cummings there. The next story is Out of This World by Henry Hass. Now, we've looked at Henry Hass in previous episodes of Planet Stories. He is a writer that is going to become an absolute fixture of the magazine. But here we have a prison break on a moon. I think it's a moon of Mars or a moon of Jupiter, one of the two. It is workmanlike in its approach. This story, it is pretty standard pulp fare. It's fun, but it is not exceptional. It does, however, have a grim little twist in this tale, which, if anyone wants to read it, I shan't be telling you. And then we move to Nelson S. Bond. Not poetry this time, for which I'm quite thankful. Back to writing short science fiction stories and Captain Chaos. This is much more fun. I quite like the way that he builds his universe. I think Bond's universe, it seems to be a consistent one throughout all of his stories, and it's very close, I think, to the Lensman universe. I don't think the Lensmen have ever shown up, but certain turns of language are the same that E.E. Doc Smith uses in his Lensman books. And I think both have these ray guns called Heimholtz. And Heimholtz is, or was, a real physicist who worked in failing to discover the rays, the powers used in the weapons that are being described. There is dated humour here and a little bit of a dated outlook, but it is amusing enough, and there is, again, as there are with so many pulp stories, a great little final twist. But the writing is also fun. A lot of it is very slang heavy, but he can produce lines that I really like. I did write this one down because I just love that. I love this idea of chaos being created. The story's called Captain Chaos. What happened next was everything at once. I think we've probably all had moments where that would be a fair description. The next story is As It Was by Carlton Smith. Now, this was not a name I had come across before, so I had to do a little bit of digging. And the reason I had not heard of the name before is that there was no Carlton Smith. It was a pseudonym of Ross Racklin. So Ross Racklin's also already got a story in this magazine. I don't know if it was a rule about this particular magazine, although some of the magazines did have this rule that you could not have a story, more than one story, by you in any particular issue. This is why a lot of pseudonyms were created, because if you were supplying more than one story, you had to come up with a different name for it to go under. I think there are examples of magazines which are just getting started, or a magazine where the editorship has just changed, where the majority of stories are by one writer but with different names each time. For people who were avidly consuming these magazines, I don't know whether they realised this at the time, whether there was, the stuff was on the grapevine, or whether people just thought that there were far more science fiction writers than there actually were. And, there are enough. Still, As It Was is a time travel experiment that goes very wrong. There is perpetual war between Earth and Venus. There are maverick scientists, and we look at a maverick scientist from both sides who team up and try to find a solution to the war which is ravaging their planets. There is double crossing, there is triple crossing. But it doesn't read as complicated as all that treachery would suggest. The final story, I think stylistically, is probably the pick of the bunch for me. It's Venus Enslaved by Manly Wade Wellman, the writer from Weird Tales and many other places. So this is the second or third month in a row that I've read something by Manly Wade Wellman, and I enjoy him every time our paths cross. This is the most trite of the works from him that I've read, but there's still something there. Again, we're on Venus. I think this is the third mention of Venus. This is the third time Venus has been the locale for the action in this one episode. So in these early 1940s, people still aren't looking very far afield, relatively speaking, for their science fiction fix. But in this story, some condemned prisoners are being sent to Venus as part of an experiment. They're trying to figure out a way to land on Venus because humans haven't arrived on Venus yet. But they keep smacking these ships full of prisoners into the planet and wondering what's, trying to find the best trajectory or approach. The three prisoners on this ship decide to take matters into their own hands and land the ship properly. That's when their troubles really begin, because there are a lot of different kinds of life forms on Venus. There are just simple roaming animals which will try to grab you, like some sort of woody squid. There are huge toads which have enslaved a bunch of men. Because yes, there are men on Venus and there are women on Venus. The women have not been enslaved. but the women all seem to talk as if they're from the 17th century, which is confusing, especially when you find out that they are from Earth and came there to Venus in the 17th century. They are outcasts from Cromwell's England. I don't believe that is ever adequately explained, other than a throwaway remark that there were plenty of scientists in the 17th century, which doesn't really hold water. But I suppose they were just very extreme pilgrims. The story is standard pulp fare, where one side befriends the humans who have arrived onto the situation, and they take on the dominant, nasty aliens. But it's done with a great deal of panache. There is, at the end of this magazine, 11 or 12 pages of readers' letters. And the readers are seemingly just having conversations with each other, and conversations which can take quite a while, because this magazine is only printed quarterly. Also, we have writers writing in to the magazine. Sometimes a writer that's actually being published in a magazine also has a letter published. It just is a prototype internet forum of people praising some things, moaning about other things. They are rating the stories from the last issue. They are rating the pictures of the stories from the last issue. And it's interesting to see that there are some opinions which haven't held up in terms of established wisdom now. There was a Lee Brackett story in the last issue. Lee Brackett is a writer who is now still well known to us. There's a few people who did not like it. I'll be interested to see what the reaction is amongst the readers once Ray Bradbury makes his first appearance in Planet Stories. Still, that's still to come. I'm not quite sure when he turns up in Planet Stories, but I don't think it's that long. Anyway, issue 12 hopefully will be coming along quicker than the 3-4 month gap I've had between 10 and 11. But until next time.